Hello! In this video, we will be creating what I like to call quadrant art. We will be basing our artwork through the use of 4 quadrants. I will also be going over various quadrant terminology. For this project, you will need a piece of 9x9 drawing paper. This one is manila in color. You will also need a piece of paper. This is construction paper. This is 1/4 the size of this square piece of paper, in that it is 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. You will also need a pencil and an eraser. A ruler is helpful but not necessarily required. A permanent black marker. This is a Sharpie fine point. A pair of scissors, and to finish off your composition, I will be demonstrating using oil pastels with baby oil and Q-tips. A piece of paper or newspaper is something that will be helpful when it comes time for employing the baby oil, as that last step is going to be messy. To begin, I'm going to take my 9x9 paper and fold it in half. I then open it up and fold it the opposite direction. My paper is now folded into 4/4. This next step is optional. You may lightly sketch a line in your fold lines so that you can clearly see your Y and your x-axis. A ruler will help you stay in those lines, but please be aware that these lines are not going to be permanent. They should be drawn lightly because we will be removing them later. Now that I have my 4 quadrants prepared, quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4, I'm going to set this paper aside and turn my attention to my smaller piece of paper. This smaller piece of paper will ultimately be used as a stencil for my design on my quadrant art. So to begin, I'm going to fold this paper into a triangle, or as I like to call it, taco fold. Now, sometimes construction paper and paper cutters are inconsistent. If you have a little bit of paper just hanging off ever so slightly, go ahead and trim off that little piece. I now have my folded triangle orientated, so my fold line is here to the left and my flaps are over here to the right. I'm going to be making a series of lines. Now, some of these lines can be wavy, some of these lines can be angular. Whatever lines I make, I'm not going to make them so complex it's going to be difficult to cut them out later. So to begin, I'm going to start here at the bottom and work my way up. About a thumb space. I'm choosing to start right here, so thumb space, working from left to right. That is a sufficient line. It's not overly complex, but it's interesting enough. When I cut it out, it will be simple enough and not too delicate and cause my paper to tear. My next line is going to be about 3 finger spaces away. Somewhat mirrors what I did right here, but I have a large space. I'm actually going to put a cutout in this space. Next, I'm going to turn my attention to this side right here. I'm going to be making a line and design along this line. So first was my thumb space away from this bottom corner, plan to cut out right here, and now I'm going to go ahead and create a line along this angular line right here. Not overly complex, but interesting enough as it is. I could also probably do another cutout if I'd like right here. Now that my design stencil is prepared, I'm going to start cutting out on the lines. keeping my paper folded. I'm, however, not doing my cutting all at once. The way I'm going to do it is to prevent my paper becoming too flimsy by having pieces that are too small. So I'm doing one segment at a time. Careful to not remove any excess, only cut on the lines that you have prepared. I'm actually going to take this smaller piece and set it aside. Then I open up this piece of paper and I'm going to snugly fit it with inside my quadrant. Now I'm starting in quadrant 1 and then I will be moving on to quadrant 2, 3, then 4. Careful to not let this overhang over your Y or your X axis. My first cut is now complete. It rotates evenly around the origin. I can now move on to my next cut. I have completed my second cut. I can open up my stencil again and begin to trace, placing it on my paper. My lines fit evenly along my X and my Y axis, and this fits like a puzzle piece in my previous lines. I have these marks made. I can now close this back up and cut on my third line on my stencil piece. Opening it up and starting again in my quadrants. I'm now ready to move on to the last portions. Since this is a small cutout, I'm going to do it all at the same time as this one right here. With this last piece, I still align my lines along my Y and my X axis. Also, it still fits like a puzzle. This basic structure of my quadrant art is done. If I had quadrant lines on this piece of paper, I would have erased them now. And my next step will be moving on to Sharpie. I'm, however, going to go ahead and model, creating a few more quadrant art pieces before moving on to the completion portion of this activity. have now completed a few quadrants designs. I will take this one to completion now so you can see the rest of the steps. Before I do so, on this one I did do the quadrant lines, so I'm going to erase those. I do not need those. The next step in this is tracing over my lines with Sharpie. I did not trace initially with Sharpie because if there was an error or a misplacement, I couldn't take it away. My pencil lines were nice structural lines for me to build this composition on. So carefully tracing the lines. Now that my lines are all traced, I will be moving on to my next step. Picking this up and putting it on my placemat so that I'm not getting oil pastel all over my table. With my oil pastels, I'm not going to do any coloring necessarily speaking. I'm going to be outlining my perimeters, following these lines on the inside and on the outside. You do have to keep in mind when you are doing this that if I line a color right here, I better pick a color right here that will blend well with it. So think of colors that are what we call analogous. Yellow and yellow-orange would blend well together. Red, violet, and violet would blend well together. Violet, however, would not blend well with yellow because they are color complements. They would neutralize each other. So think about what colors you're going to be blending ultimately together. Think of those combinations. Are they going to mix well, or are they going to turn into what we call a neutral? Placing a thick line here, about pinky width. Followed this line parallel to the line on the inside, tracing this perimeter. Now I can go on the opposite side of the line and trace this perimeter with this color. I have this space right here. I'm going to go ahead and pull some of this dark color, but only on this side right here. Outlining the inside of these triangles. Now I have a darker violet right here. I'm going to take a lighter violet along this perimeter because these two violets will blend into well together. Something that interchangeably blends with any color is white and black. I can employ these two wherever I would like with whatever color. When I add white, it creates what we call a tint. When I add black, it's what we call a shade. Another color I can use in combination is the already tinted color of that color. Add white to red and you have pink. If I had light blue, well, that's the tint of a darker blue. Pink right here would blend really well with my red. I am now done tracing my perimeters of my composition. I'm now going to employ the baby oil to my composition. Now I'm going to be working with lightest colors and then to darker colors. my oil will start to pick up pigment, and it's better to work from light to dark. When I'm doing this process, I'm brushing from the perimeter into the area, so from the edges into the middle. Only a little bit of baby oil on your Q-tip at a time is best. You do not want to saturate your paper. You use it until it doesn't pick up any of the oil pastel pigment. When it starts to dry out, that's when you start to dip again in your baby oil. Something else you can do is switch the end of your Q-tip if you're going to be switching to colors that are not as similar. My composition is now complete. With that oil pastel and the baby oil blending technique I showed you, I have nice shadowy effect. It creates depth and richness in the composition. It is now your turn to see what you come up with. Thank you for watching.